And how do you understand mission?
So I've been thinking a little bit about mission, particularly because of this COVID shutdown and the lack of connection with people. I mean, obviously, mission starts between at least two people. And it was interesting. I started reflecting on our history. So Trudy and I met when we were working at Teen Challenge, and we used to do street outreach, and that classic kind of 1950s view of mission, which was we go out into this dark place and we bring the light of Jesus with us. And we did that for, a really long time, 10 years plus, around the streets of St Kilda, streets of Melbourne, Frankston, Dandenong, all the kind of hot spots. And, fundamentally, we were reaching out to people who use drugs or people involved in prostitution. But when I look back at those days, particularly in light of, 30 years down the track, I'm reminded that really we were strangers speaking to strangers. And some of the references that I probably hold most closely now around what I think are missionary principles, scriptures like be prepared to give a response for why you believe what you believe, with gentleness and respect. I'm not sure that a stranger approaching another stranger is particularly respectful, because we can't necessarily, unless the Holy Spirit gives us a word of knowledge or something, can't necessarily hope to understand a person's circumstance and what we're speaking into. And so I think there's a need for us to kind of take a step back and have a think about what that respectful piece looks like. I think respect starts with understanding, and it starts with the other person's well-being at the heart of what we're doing. Anyway, so reflecting on these things a lot, we had cause just before the second lockdown to catch up with some old mates from those days, from the Teen Challenge days. And as a consequence of that, we were given a Google Drive connection and saw a whole stack of photos from when we were children, really. And one of those photos was of what we used to call, I don't know if we still call them this, but a bag lady. So there was a woman who used to wander around St Kilda. Her name was Sadie. And she used to have a shopping trolley filled with stuff. Goodness only knows what it was, actually. And for a very short time, for about 2 or 3 months, she spent those months sleeping under the porch in our house in St Kilda, because she wouldn't come in because she was too embarrassed. And we thought that at least sleeping under the porch, she was under shelter in the pouring rain. And we put a big old vinyl lounge out there, and she used to kind of curl up like it was a bed. And at least we knew she was safe. And every morning I would make a coffee and go out and have a chat with Sadie. Anyway, so I saw a photo of Sadie up against the red brick wall of that house. I had these real pangs of nostalgia, probably, but also really deep love. And Sadie since passed away. She passed away without us knowing. So there was a pauper's funeral that I think the Sisters of Charity put together, actually, for Sadie. But we missed the funeral, and that's a terrible reality. But what struck me was how much I loved her. And I said to Trudy just the other day, isn't it sad that it's taken me 30 years to actually understand that mission, or bringing the good news of Jesus to other people, ought to be really driven by a deep and honest love for the other person. So I think anything else is less than that. I was going to say not so great, but each to their own. And I think we all have to act according to how we see God motivating us. And at the time, 30 years ago, we thought that was the thing that people had to do. We had to bring the gospel to every corner of the earth, and that even meant seedy, dark corners of the streets of Melbourne, and squats where people had kind of taken ownership of people's homes. And we made a point for a time there of befriending all of the pretty serious drug dealers on the streets of St Kilda, and one of them was a friend for many, many years, used to come around for a barbecue on a pretty regular basis. And that was in the end, I think, driven by a real knowing of a person love for that person, and wanting them to have what we had, which I think is a little bit different to the huge campaign and the banners and posters and tents and that kind of very American style of evangelism, which is an old word we don't use much anymore, hey. But I think that love piece, that seeing that photo of Sadie just the other day and feeling that pang of mourning for her and just a deep love for her. She was probably the most generous person I have ever encountered. Just brought home the truth that I think sharing this good news that Jesus loves us, that he died for us, that he wants us to have full and amazing lives, ought to be driven by a deep knowing and loving of a person. So I think that kind of makes mission simpler and harder. Simpler because we get to share with people with whom we have some common ground and some understanding, but we can't hide behind the Christian facade anymore because they know us. I think they get to know us with all of our foibles and all of our humanity and all of our frustrations, and they get to see us without the polished Christian kind of Sunday face. And so, somehow I think that's better. I wonder how it was for the disciples to spend time with Jesus on a day-to-day basis and sleep with him and eat with him and walk with him and talk with him. I don't know that Jesus would be annoying or have annoying habits, but maybe. But they got to see his humanity as much as his deity, and I think that's an important truth, that maybe we, the church, have lost our moral authority because what we say and what we do aren't the same thing. And mission, that means I'm a neighbour or a brother or a cousin or an uncle or a father, more importantly. Mission that puts me in that relational space doesn't give me the luxury of hiding behind the church edifice anymore. I can't wave a big King James Bible at people and tell them that they're going to be condemned because they probably wave the same Bible back at me and say, but what about this and what about that? So I've come to understand that mission really ought to be rooted very much in relationship. And I think that really accords well with the picture of Jesus coming from heaven and emptying himself of all of his authority and sharing his life with us and spending time with us and knowing us and having lived as one of us. Then he can speak into our lives because he knows what it's like. And I think that's true mission. We can speak into people's lives because we know what it's like. And we're sharing that lived experience. COVID's a great leveler, and it gives us a moment in time to talk about the things that matter and what things are important to us and which of the values that we hold we're going to kind of ascribe to. I've had many conversations in the last few weeks with neighbours and work colleagues about, so what's important now? I think we've made a statement as a community that health and life sit above accumulation of wealth and stuff and power even and position. These things we've said, I think, in some of our actions at least, are more important. So that gives us a really nice launching pad, I think, for sharing a gospel that's about love and life and meaning and fullness. In Italian, there's this wonderful way of putting a good, we talk about the good life. In Italian, the words are la vita grossa, which means a fat life. I kind of like that. And I think that that's the life Jesus brings to us. It's a fat life. It's not necessarily with everything and seeping with gold and jewels. That's not what I mean by fat, but a good, hearty meal that hits the spot when you're hungry. I think that's the life that Jesus brings us. And I think that's the good news. And I think that being missionaries now is about looking for opportunities and understanding the people that we're with, to the point where we can speak that kind of stuff into a life that is less than that. Or well, maybe not less than that, but into a life where there's that questioning and that searching, and to provoke maybe the questioning and searching where there isn't, where people are pretty satisfied with how they live, because, you know, I think we're one of the most affluent cultures on the planet at the moment. So yeah, they're my random thoughts about what I think the word mission means in 2020, which is radically different to what I thought it was in 1984. And, you know, I think that's been a journey, and I would never presume to say to people this is how it needs to be done, because I think God puts us all in the places that we're in because that's exactly where he needs us to be, because nobody else can be in that place for us, for him. I read this beautiful, for me, seminal book called Disciple, which was written by one Carlos Ortiz, who at the time the book was written in the very early 1980s, he was operating the biggest church in the world. So he was before Young E Cho and before all those guys. He was a South American fella. I can't remember how many thousand people went to his church. And the story of how his church started is staggering, really. It's a great read. It's called Disciple. And he says, I'm a worker in a factory and I'm there to be a missionary for Jesus. And while I'm there, I earn an income. I go to university as a missionary for Jesus. And while I'm there, I get a degree in medicine. So his whole view and his whole focus was about being a representative of Jesus wherever he found himself. And the other stuff, the shopping or the paying the bill or the going to the post office or filling the tank with petrol, was secondary to what he saw himself as being primarily. His whole identity was around being a representative of Jesus in the moment. And so I think that's not a bad point to leave that, maybe.